regular session this evening at 6:04. Ada, would you please take roll call?
Yeah, with pleasure. Mr. Nielsen?
Present.
Mr. Rader?
Here.
Dr. Ramos?
Present.
Mrs. Reyes?
Here.
Mrs. Sashina?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Once again, can we go ahead and recite the Pledge of Allegiance? Allegiance to the
To the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Again, as a reminder, if you'd silence any cell phones that you might have there with you, we'd like to go ahead and take a moment of silence and just get some thoughts to those who are suffering and need help in this world today, that they might be watched over and taken care of properly. Thank you. Are there any board members that would like to make a statement this evening? If not, I'd just like to say it's already been 2 or 3 weeks ago. I had the opportunity to go to one of the drive-by promotions. I was impressed with, I thought there'd only be a few people there, but I think we counted over 100 cars that came through. It was really impressive. The kids came through. I was impressed with many of the young women. They were dressed up really nicely, and those who had moon roofs on the top of their car, their dad had them there, and they were out waving and excited about it. And some of the other young men were sitting in the front seat of the car and had a hard time even rolling down the window as we gave things to them as they walked by. But just congratulations to all of those. I think the thing that caught my attention is one of them drove by with 2020 on their window on one side and 2024 on the other one. That kind of made me feel really old at that time. So Kathy, you might be young, but I'm a few years on top of that. So yeah. All right, Dr. Freeman, would you like to share your report with us?
Thank you, Mr. President. Buenas tardes a todos, and good evening to everyone. Probably the most significant thing happening in the district this past month were the promotion celebrations. But before I talk about those, I feel it's important to address what's transpiring across the country and the world. So in the midst of the worldwide pandemic that has disproportionately impacted minorities and people of poverty, we've all borne witness to the brutal treatment of African Americans in our country. We recognize the demonstrations that followed the killings of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and many others are expressions of the frustration that people of color have amassed over years of persecution, injustices, inequality, and racism. The cruel indifference of Derek Chauvin and the heart-wrenching videos added to the disparate effects of the pandemic magnify the inequality and fuel the upheavals in our streets into what we can only hope will become a movement for greater justice in our society. We must speak out against racism, vitriol, and violence. Silence only contributes to the problem. In order to move forward, we must not stand idly by when there's injustice. This is the other epidemic facing our society. We see it when people fail to act without regard to the impact it'll have on their community. And it appears in people who act out without regard for the impact their behaviors have on others. In order to move forward, we must understand that to say Black Lives Matter does not mean that one thinks other lives do not. It means to remember that they count as much as others, not less. To say that there is white privilege is not to say that white people have had easy life. It's to say that they've not had to suffer the years of maltreatment that most African Americans have had to endure in our society. Equity is central to the values and work of public schools. Yet we live in a time of almost obscene inequity. The perpetual traumas of inequity and discrimination take a significant toll on the mental health and well-being of witnesses and victims. We cannot undo these harms with platitudes of valuing everyone equally. Seeking equity is more than making things more accessible. It must manifest in actively becoming more anti-racist and more anti-discriminatory. As leaders who value equity, we must work to dismantle all forms of systemic racism and discrimination. We must reaffirm our commitment to being culturally sensitive and ensure that cultural responsiveness permeates all members of our community, our educators, our students, and their families. It falls to all of us to build a sense of hope for our children and to articulate a vision of a future that's supportive and compassionate. One day soon, it will fall to all of them to help make a more just nation, and to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity. We must oppose education policies that systematically reinforce inequity and support policies that bring our collective resources together in a way that builds capacity where opportunity has been scarce. In these ways, we can systematically reinforce equity and justice. We stand in solidarity with those who are working to disrupt systemic oppression and promote equity and inclusion. We take great pride in the diversity of our student body, their outstanding growth, their many accomplishments, and last month, 730 of them, of our 8th grade students, matriculated from our district. They'll start their journey into high school in a year like none has ever seen before in American education. To mark this important milestone, each one of our schools created a tunnel of hope along the front drives of our schools. Our Littleton Education Foundation helped support the schools with balloons, signs, and supplies. Students received a jump drive with a school-created 8th grade promotion video, a promotion yard sign they could display in their front yards, and a scroll with the Kids at Hope pledge, among other things. The level of energy and enthusiasm amongst our staff was amazing, and many of the families decorated their cars, as President Nielsen said, in really creative and colorful ways. The students reacted in typical fashion while soaking it all in, and others who looked embarrassed by the attention. Everyone had a lot of fun cheering the students, and we all would like to thank Mr. Nielsen and Ms. Sochnik for making time to represent the board at some of these events. Although the combined efforts, through the combined efforts of the district and Southwest Food Service staff, we were able to offer curbside pickup meal service to our students starting in mid-March and ending just before Memorial Day. That program has ended, and we've transitioned to our Grab a Meal summer feeding program. Meals are provided on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays free of charge to children up to 18 years old at Country Place Leadership Academy and Estrella Vista STEM Academy. On May 27th, it was the first day of meal service for breakfast and lunch, including meals for the weekend. So far, summer feeding program has already served 5,500 meals. Our staff and the Southwest Food Service Excellence team diligently work to follow all sanitation and social distancing guidelines so we can safeguard the health of our students, our staff, and our community. Our mission at Littleton, in the Littleton district, continues to be to create high-quality, comprehensive, success-oriented learning opportunities for everyone in our schools, even in the midst of the pandemic. Our board is discussing tonight the challenges and opportunities for us as we consider how to open the new year later in this meeting. Our theme for the 2021 school year is sunshine in our pockets. That's not just because sunshine's a good disinfectant, but because we can't stop the feeling of all the progress we're looking forward to making with our students and staff this coming year. In closing, I'd like to express our appreciation to the Arizona Commission of the Arts for their donation of $1,500. And that's all I have this evening.
I am not back off online right now.
If you can bear with us for a little bit, President Nielsen
Computer shut down.
got bumped off the meeting and we're rebooting.
Okay.
And Are
He
you gonna-
should be in now.
Okay. We could have gone to commercial, I guess. But
Commercial break. Thank you. No, I'm back online now, right? Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Freeman. I appreciate the instruction and the great insight that you do always have as you present that information to us. We don't have any program showcases tonight. So, all right, anything called to the public? Anything that's come in? Thank you. Move to item number 9, the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda that any of you would like to discuss or have removed from the consent agenda? If there is not, could I have a motion to accept it as it is?
This is Amy Soshnick. I move that we accept the consent agenda.
This is Kathy. I'll second.
Thank you very much. All those in favor, okay,
Aye.
take a roll call and
All right, Mr. Nielsen,
aye.
Mr. Rader,
Aye.
Dr. Ramos. Dr. Ramos,
Hi, can you not hear me?
Can now.
thank you.
Oh.
Ms. Soshanek,
Aye.
Thank you very much. Move ahead. Moving on then to item number 10, the superintendent enrollment contract. There's no additional questions other than what we have discussed at one other time. Could I have a motion to approve that?
This is Amy Soshnick, and I recommend the governing board approve the new employment contract for the superintendent.
Thank you, Amy.
This is John. I second.
Thank you very much. It passes. Would you take an eye on that one, a roll call on that one as well?
Mr. Nielsen,
Aye.
Mr. Rader,
Aye.
Dr. Ramos,
Aye.
Mrs. Reyes,
Aye.
Mrs. Soshanek.
Aye.
Thank you all very much. Item number 11, 2020-2021 classroom site fund excluding component number 4.
Mr. President, members of the board,
Thank you.
we're bringing this item back this evening and recommending partial approval of the 2020-2021 classroom site fund. This would allow the biweekly payments to be made to employees as we work through changes for schools in the next fiscal year. Approval is recommended will allow for the LEAP committee to review the concerns that the board had only for component 4 and gather input from staff as more information and guidance is given from both the federal and state governments. Approval as recommended would allow the district to move forward on the components that the board had no questions or concerns about at the May meeting. Mr. Nielsen, you're on mute.
I keep forgetting to unmute myself. I'm sorry. Any additional comments or questions on that? If not, may I have a motion to approve that site funding minus the component number 4, which we'll do some additional work on. Can you
This
scroll
is-
down? There it is.
This is Amy, and I move that the governing board approve the revisions to the classroom site fund plan excluding component 4 for the 2020-2021 school year.
Thank you, Amy. Second.
This is Mr. Rader. I second.
Thank you very much. And can we take a roll call there, Ada? Aye.
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 Okay, thank you very much. We'll just get it to the point where we get this technology all down and we won't have to use it anymore. Item number 12, Ms. Kelly, would you like to review that one as well?
Yes, Mr. President, members of the board. I have two policies this evening and one exhibit to share. No action will be taken by the board this evening on first reads, and no action will be taken on the exhibit. I'd like to start with 12A, policy GCD, which is nearly identical to policy GDD. The difference is one is administrative or professional staff and one is support staff. So let me go through letter A, policy GCD first. Standard practice is to review employment benefits and compare the districts to the surrounding areas. We continually work to recruit and retain talent. COVID-19 moved this policy to the forefront as we realized that employees could lose vacation days due to the emergency closure and the need to have staff available during this time. Currently, employees are allowed to carry forward 20 days of vacation. And if they have more than that at the end of the fiscal year, they may convert a minimal number of days based on years of employment to sick leave or lose those days altogether. Administration is recommending a change to the existing policy that would allow employees to carry forward 1.5 times the number of days currently allowed under policy. There's also very limited circumstances that prohibit certain employees from taking vacation. In addition to the policy is to allow the superintendent, excuse me, to pay out excess days to an employee when it is in the best interest of the district to do so. As mentioned, COVID-19 has created extenuating circumstances for the district as well as other organizations and companies. So administration is asking the board to consider temporarily adding an additional 6 days, which would bring the cap to 36, just at a time that we could sunset that, or the board could review that in a year to determine if they would like to make that change permanent. We had an instance today actually that just came up. We have several staff ready to take vacation those first 2 weeks in July, which is pretty typical. And we've had to ask about 4 staff members to postpone that time due to the state asking for the review of our Arizona online application. And so this is just one example of how vacations have become very fluid to the point that, you know, we're looking to make this a little easier to maintain for our administrators. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone might have about this.
You have any comments or questions on that?
This is Amy, and I have just a question. So I guess my concern is if we have an employee who has accrued more sick leave, then they're not allowed to use it. And maybe this was in policy and I just didn't realize it. So like I'm thinking of it, we have a lot of younger teachers who may want to go on maternity leave. And so currently they can only take 20 days.
Ms. Soshenik, this is only for vacation, and it would affect 12-month employees because they're the only group that accrues the vacation. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear about that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Amy. Any of the rest of you have any other questions on that part of it? There's not. Ms. Kelly, will you go to the next one? Or does that take care of both of them?
Well, actually, Mr. Nielsen, it's exactly the same, but if we don't have any questions, we can ask Ms. Chizzy to throw the policy up there really quick. We have taken pride in the fact that we treat all of our employee groups the same, whether they're support or certificated or administrative staff. And so this just further aligns both policies to be exactly the same. Some other districts don't, they still have the old way of doing things. So unless you have questions, it's basically the same.
Okay, any questions on either one of those? Not, I appreciate your work there, Ms. Kelly.
Thank you.
Item number 13. Dr.
Mr.
Freeman.
President, I
Yes.
need to do 12C as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I skipping over that? Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead and do number C, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. 12C are exhibits for GCAE and GDAE. Both exhibits are exactly the same, but again, address the two different employee groups, the professional staff and then the support staff. We have never had a telecommute or work from home agreement until the COVID assignment to home occurred. And so we started looking into some different things, reading about policies that other districts had and took a look at. So the exhibits here outline the expectations for telecommuting or working from home. So prior to the closure of schools, as I said, there's no practice. So this exhibit would set expectations for employees who are in positions that are conducive to telecommuting. This arrangement is a viable, flexible work option for some positions. This exhibit would not make telecommuting an entitlement, but rather an accommodation based on conditions that may arise for the employee or the employer. This agreement in no way changes the terms or conditions of employment. Both the Society of Human Resource Management, known as SHRM, and the American Association for School Personnel Administrators, ASPA, recommend that if telecommuting is a work option, then guidelines need to be established to mutually protect the employer and the employee. And this is what you see attached to this item this evening.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions about this one? All right, anything else on that one?
No, thank you, Mr. President. I'll turn it over back to you.
Thank you. I've let you take care of all of those now since I forgot you there on the last one. Dr. Freeman, would you like to review number 13 with us?
Yes, I'm lucky 13 tonight. And so we were hoping that we would have time for the board to have some discussion and maybe lay out some ideas for the opening of school for next year. So if we could get the PowerPoint up on item 13, we can get started on that. And as I'm waiting for that to come up, of course, the first slide is the title slide, which says what we're going to talk about tonight. And of course, when our board meetings being broadcast and recorded, we like to have things go really smoothly. And now I think everybody can see the title slide, which is our meeting tonight and some discussion. We don't have plans for action to be taken tonight, but we would like to put together action items for the next meeting if we can, as much as we can front load the school year. So the next slide, you'll see what our planned agenda for this evening is. So one is to review what's happened so far with the emergency action on the pandemic, and then give board members an opportunity to share concerns that they've had themselves or they've heard in the community, with the idea that our staff will be writing those down. And so if they don't come up in things that we've suggested to be addressed, that we can get those on our list and be sure to bring them back on June 23rd with some information for members if that's needed. After we do that, we'd like to review the feedback from the town halls and surveys that we've done, so everybody has an idea of what kind of input we got from the community. We would like to explore some potential models. It's not an exhaustive list, but it gives an opportunity to have some discussion of pros and cons of different ways to approach the start of the school year. And then if we could narrow down some options to start the year next year by hearing how the majority of the board might feel about wearing masks or things like that. And that'll be the final part of our discussion today. So let's start out by reviewing progress. Everybody is probably aware by now, we finished out the year with home learning support. A lot of paper packet materials were put out, but there was also online support that kids could get academically and for social emotional learning. And teachers did Loom videos and sent things out, a lot of work on communication on Remind. So the engagement did vary a lot from teacher to teacher and family to family, and we learned a lot in doing that. Our counselors, social workers did a great job of helping provide support. And I think everybody was a little surprised by the impact that staying home and being locked down had on them. I know I didn't think I'd struggle with it, and I did more than I thought. So hopefully, maybe we've all learned a little bit more about ourselves and have found a way to find some support. I think a lot of us feel better by starting to put pieces together for the start of next year, like we're making some progress. The grab and go meals last summer, we served not in the summer, at the end of the school year, we served almost 316,000 meals in the fourth quarter. Summer meals have started, and I talked about that in my comments to start the meeting. We did some deep cleaning of campuses during the closure. We always do summer cleaning, but of course we have disinfecting and things like that going on as well. And custodians kind of following along behind people when offices are being used and making sure that those are wiped down. We've started to order sanitizers. I don't know if you can't really see the bottom of that slide. I don't know if we need to shrink it a little bit so the sides fit. It's going to be tricky. So we've started ordering sanitizers, wipes. We're looking at plexiglass screens. We're running into a problem with procurement where we have to go to bid if we purchase more than a certain number, more than like $10,000 worth of equipment, which means we have to go to bid or if there's not a state bid. And that slows things down quite a bit. It is one of the areas of flexibility we've asked the legislature to address as emergency pandemic procurement waivers and those kind of things. But we're trying to build up supplies. We have several gallons of sanitizer, and I think we have something like 10,000 masks. So we're building up our supply pool now in hopes of being ready for whatever we're asked to do to start the school year. So moving along, we of course are continually monitoring the information at national and state levels. The governor's last executive order, his press conference, materials coming out from the Department of Education, the State Department of Health, the county health department, attending a lot of webinars and Zoom meetings, reading a lot of material from other agencies, and of course, always weighing decisions on what we're doing based on staff, student safety, and well-being. So for instance, this month in June, 12-month staff is back at their work areas 2 days a week. And we have people who are, wearing masks when they're out about on district property as a courtesy to other people to reduce any kind of spread. Mostly concerned about people who are asymptomatic but may have some of the virus. We've been exploring a variety of scenarios to accommodate student learning and to present tonight. Districts have been talking to each other and comparing plans and those pros and cons. Some districts have already gone so far as to announce what they're going to do. Others are taking a little more time, and we're in that category. And I'll tell you in a slide or two about the things we still don't know coming up. So one of those is working with the governor's staff on flexibility that should be issued soon, according to the staff. The DHS approved opening schools in phase 1, even though they're bigger than groups of 10, due to other factors that were concerns about kids and trying to weigh the concern about kids not being in school and kids being in school. And so they've recommended that we figure out a way to get school going. And so that's the challenge that we have moving forward. Superintendent of Public Instruction Hoffman and ADE Task Force released a roadmap on June 1st, and they're starting a technology task force now. I think it's going to meet tomorrow, which is intended to help with supporting teachers in distance learning. And the department has also has a continuity of operation plan that they hope to have ready this week. So we don't have that yet. We're kind of waiting to see what that says. The Maricopa County Department of Public Health is issuing guidance with clear policy coming soon. We've had a meeting with the head of that department and have a better understanding of how we can prevent the spread of the virus when school opens. It's far from perfect. And there are some things that are going to be out of the district's control where we're going to need to depend on Maricopa County Department of Public Health to tell us what to do if we have infections or any kind of spread. And that probably would be on a school by school basis if school resumes with kids in the school setting. Finally, the Joint Legislative Budget Committee plans to release a complete fiscal year 2020 and 21 budget update on June 19th when they meet. It'll include revised revenue forecasts along with updated state spending assumptions. And the last release they did said that revenue was up a little bit from the last projection that projected a $1.1 billion shortfall. So they are seeing mostly some increases in privilege tax. That may be a positive sign, but I think the state's still looking at a downturn. The question is, how much of a downturn will there be? So that's what we know, and what we're not sure of is what all of this will cost. So we're getting a lot of information from national groups. This is an analysis that was done by the school business officials and the school administrators national organizations. And so they added up some of the additional factors that need to be considered when dealing with distancing and sanitizing COVID. And so what they did is they took all of the kids in the United States and all of the districts and divided that to get an average school district size. And that was, I think, 3,654, 3,456, something like that. And then added up the average cost of the average district. Now, we're bigger than that, I think probably by 1.25 times. So if you take that 1.778 million and equate that out to a 6,300 student school district, that's about $3 million if you just use those estimates of average cost. Our COVID relief we expect from the federal government is $900,000. So we have about a $2 million gap if these estimates are accurate, which means school districts are going to need probably more help from the state if we're going to try to put all of our students back in brick and mortar programs. So in the next slide, what you'll see is we're really not sure how those average estimates are going to impact us in Arizona. Arizona has some unique characteristics that make us different from, say, the Midwest or the Northeast Seaboard that may not bear out to be true. The gap may not be that big. We're still waiting for the continuity of operations plan template from the department. Why we have some guidance from the county health department, we're still waiting for clear policy protocols. We know, for instance, that if students have an infection or showing signs, they'll be sent home for 10 days. And we know that the county health department will look at the amount of spread in the immediate area of the school and the amount of spread in the school to decide if they will close the school and for how long. And we'll be working with the county health department on each one of those incidents and events. We need to figure out how to address people infected and the 10 days out, if we're going to provide learning support, and if it's staff, what the impact on the school would be if you have a lot of staff who are missing work because of a COVID infection. We're not sure what the flexible authority will be that the governor mentioned in his press conference. One of the things that we need to really provide flexibility and options for the school boards and school districts is a student count flexibility. So what you're hearing a lot of districts talking about is alternating schedules. We're calling them AB plans. So whether people meet in the morning or the afternoon, or they meet on Monday and Tuesday, and somebody else meets on Thursday and Friday, that in an AB plan, you schedule your building so only half the students are in it at a time. That allows you to have social distancing. There's absolutely no way to have social distancing with everybody in the school at once. And you know, all of you who've been to visit classrooms can appreciate that. With about half the kids, you can probably get 6 feet or so between them in a classroom. If you tried to get 6 feet between every kid in a line down the hallway, it would take the entire hallway. And so in common areas and doorways and things like that, there isn't really probably the opportunity to have a true 6 feet. We probably, you know, can try to keep kids at arm's length from each other, so there's not a lot of touching. But depending on the plan that we choose when we go back, we'll have to really be honest with our community about describing what we'll be able to provide for social distancing for parents to consider when they decide what to do with their kids. So the other is, I mentioned procurement in the pandemic. We very quickly get to procurement limits, and we're competing for procurement. If you can imagine, all over the United States, schools are buying sanitizer, and all over the United States, schools are buying plexiglass screens, and all over the United States, people are trying to buy distancing things, hotspots, computers, and all of those things are in large demand. And so if we can get some exceptions on procurement from the legislature, just in the case of an emergency, we could get more orders in probably sooner, and maybe be able to have more of that on hand when needed and not waiting for it. For instance, we'd hate to have to close school because we didn't have certain supplies. And the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, as I said, is meeting later this month. Their meeting will be before our next board meeting. But what we're understanding is that the legislature is going to go into special session on anything that will impact the budget, like school budget stability proposals. They're not going to want to do that till after they know what the revenue is. So that's cutting it pretty close for us. I don't know how much state government could be geared up and ready to act, but it's possible that there will be implications for the school district budget based on a special session that may actually happen after we've already started the fiscal year and started to work on our budget. We'll have to do budget revisions in October if that's the case. So there is quite a bit of uncertainty that we're dealing with as we move forward. In the next slide, you'll see that some of the things that we're reinforcing for reducing the spread include encouraging people to stay home when appropriate. If kids have fever or they have any other symptoms, we really don't want them to come to school to help reduce the spread. We're going to be doing a lot with educating the learning community and communicating expectations. That'll probably be over and over and over again. And I think you're hearing that in other places as well. Developing criteria for return to school and return to school during the year when people are sent home or if school has to close. Configuring spaces and routines with things like plexiglass shields, masks, limiting access to space or spreading out access to space over time, and then developing criteria to handle potential closures. We may be in a situation where the county tells us to close the school tomorrow, and we need to get the word to everybody that school's not in session tomorrow. It's kind of like a snow day situation, might be in the Midwest, that school's not happening. And so communication will be key in making sure that we have good contact information for our parents, and those kind of things will be more important than ever before. And let's see, we're getting close, I think close to the end of part one, which is new protocols. Those would be business rules for cleaning and disinfecting. And so what county health department is telling us is that it's this isn't a virus that's got a super hardy sheath. So really soap and water, pretty low intensity EPA recommended cleaning supplies take care of this virus pretty well. It's just going to be a matter of how much we're cleaning, how often, and what method. And we're going to want to be really clear and consistent with communicating that to staff and to the community. And then modified layouts and routines. So offices will probably have screens. Classrooms, if depending on what configuration the board elects to use for next year, could have some distancing, and could be more or less. Students may be making their own little desk partitions they can keep with them, keep them clean or make them disposable. Minimizing sharing of things like computers, things in the library, obviously in the cafeteria. There'd have to be a lot of cleaning and wiping down between cohorts. There's a question about if you even want to open your playground, if we want to have middle school sports, how the nurse can handle isolation in the area if somebody's sick. Of course, everybody who sees the nurse doesn't necessarily have COVID. They dispense hundreds of medications a day in that office. And so the nurse's office is a busy place, even when people are managing regular healthy routines. And then probably limiting access and gatherings of people. So if you do have an event, it may not be people coming to campus like they're used to, and our parent night probably will be a virtual parent night or things like that, so that we're not having big crowds in small spaces. Now we're to part two. So that's a quick review of the things we know, the things we don't know. And one of the things that we want to know that we don't know is what concerns members may have, or things that they'd like to be sure under consideration by the district. If there's any themes of concerns from their constituents based on our communication, media coverage on the pandemic and Arizona trends. I know we got a lot of comments on people in our community who are checking out all of the resources from the CDC and watching the news. And of course, the news recently has showed a big increase in infections. And so I'm sure that's concerning to people. If, Mr. President, do you want me to just take people when they call out their name, or would you like to guide that discussion?
No, if you'd just like to go ahead, and Ada, why don't you just go down or go up the row right there and just ask, as you've got that set up there, and if there's any comments or additional things you'd like to see, you go that way.
Will you let me start with you, Mr. Nielsen?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Nielsen.
I think I'll wait till everybody gets done here, so.
So would you like me to go?
Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you very much. I think as far as concerns, as a parent myself, I think one of the concerns I had, and I don't want this to be taken as an insult to the staff and the remarkable job that was undertaken to transition from a normal school year to no school in a matter of days. But I think in my mind, I always assumed we would be more prepared to switch to a fully online or fully digital learning environment. And I don't think that this is uncommon for our district, but the paper packets kind of going back in time, if you will, I assumed that we would be able to really transition to teachers providing learning opportunities through the one-on-one devices that we provide and other sources directly to our students. So I think as we move forward from my perspective, there's still going to be tons of unknowns, and that we need to be prepared to transition from classroom learning, partial classroom learning, to full digital learning, um, to a mixture of both. And it almost needs to be seamless and interchangeable so that students and teachers have the flexibility to determine, I'm not able to go to school today. Somebody in my family sick. I think I might have been excused or exposed to somebody, so that they're able to make these determinations themselves and choose not to come in. And whether it's a teacher that doesn't feel safe or doesn't feel like they can come in, or it's a student that we're still able to provide continuity to students, or continuity in education to all of our students. So in my mind, and maybe this is moving beyond the initial part of this discussion, I'd really like to see us be prepared for a 100% online education. And that, just as I'm sitting in at the ULC tonight with the group, where we're interacting um, through technology, that our students would bring their one-on-one devices and be receiving their education through digital means, even if they're in-person classrooms, so that if the very next day that the teacher's unable to come in, or the student is unable to come in, that the education could still continue. I think, of course, there's also tons of logistical concerns regarding whether we need to stagger start times for all of our grades, for example, so that you don't have a lot of kids coming onto campus at the same time. Um, is transportation even feasible if we have to limit seats to one student per seat, staggered throughout a bus? Does that mean the bus's capacity is only 10, and does it make sense to be running buses, or how many additional buses that we need to run for 10 or 15 students? And of course, too, what type of protocols do we have for screening at bus stops as students come onto campus, and what are our expectations for parents? Again, that maybe that's more than we were supposed to say at this initial point, but I think that those are just some of the common themes that I've been thinking about as I've been reviewing the roadmap for reopening schools and some of our previous discussions. So I'm sure there's lots to still cover, but those are just some of my initial thoughts.
So did he leave anything for the rest of the members?
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. Okay, next.
Are you going in alphabetical order, or how are you?
We're going to do it the roll. I was going to have Ada just call names as we go down here, though.
Okay.
Dr. Ramos.
Huh. So much has been covered, so I will be brief. I think the safety, as we know, is the primary concern, and so making sure that we have processes in order for those students who might be at a higher risk, and alternatives if we actually go back into the classroom would be of concern to me. In addition to that, piggybacking on what John was mentioning, I think being able to move to 100% online in a way that offers creativity, which I think can be challenging, but I think important in order to maintain the attention of the students. And then the item that's really significant for me is our having metrics, like a way to measure the effectiveness of whatever it is that we're doing, but in particular, if we're going to be online primarily, we need to have some metrics that look to whether we, increased or decreased the retention of information and or learning. I'm not sure what of all of those metrics would be, but I think that will be really important for us to think of in advance, so that we'll know if we're being effective or not. beyond the testing, which I don't know if we even know what the statewide testing will be in the future. But if we developed our own metrics, then we could track the effectiveness of the measures that we put in place. That's all I can think of right now.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Next.
Mrs. Reyes?
So I kind of mimic both comments before, so I'm going to try not to go over them again. Definitely there was a concern when Mr. Rader mentioned, I had assumed we would be able to do much more online learning than we did. I did get a lot of community feedback on the paper packets. And I will say people were quite surprised how antiquated that process was. So I myself have seen the packets, I have grandkids, and I was also thinking to myself, to be quite honest, as a parent, I would have been extremely disappointed. And that's not to say this was easy, believe me, I get it. I just think we need to focus more energy on technology or whatever it is to get ourselves up to standard. I had a parent contact me who has a friend in a different district. And I mean, they were just telling me what they were able to do, which was light years away from where I thought we were. So I realized we can't be like everyone, but to me, we seemed extremely antiquated. So that was extremely important enough for me to say it again. I can tell you in opening, the city has opened, we're in phase 1. We have 3 phases. So we opened our first phase in June, our second phase in July, and our third phase in August. Wow, I can tell you things we've learned, things we've done very well, and things we're still learning. So I can't imagine children trying to herd them together and yet keep them apart. You have an extremely, extremely challenging job. The biggest challenge I think you'll face is telling children or parents, if you're unwell, stay home. Never happen. You can say it to your pink, but they think they have allergies. They have a headache. It's okay. You just have a little sore throat. That to me is going to be your biggest challenge. We have that with adults. So how you're going to do that, I think you're going to have some tough criteria, and what that'll look like, I don't know. One thing we found, you must put markers, especially I think that's going to be helpful with children. Tell people where they should stand. If it's possible to mark the hallway, line the hallway. You guys stand on this line, right? Kids are, especially little kids are kind of used to me going, stand in line. Now you just stand on maybe an animal or, our theme or whatever, maybe your district emblem or whatever it is. Get people used to knowing there's a place they have to go. That would be true if you're considering serving lunch. How you're going to do that? I don't know. Maybe you could bring lunch in the classrooms. I'm not saying you could, or maybe you could encourage parents more to buy, bring lunches. I don't know. That's going to be a challenge. Funding. I'm concerned about funding. If the surveys I'm hearing I just take our own employees are saying, I don't want to come back because I'm concerned. I'm concerned that it's not healthy. I'm going to get sick. So I can't imagine sending my child and having those concerns. If 20% of our children don't come back to the school, what are we going to do for funding? How are you going to support the rest? So funding is a great concern. And I think, Dr. Freeman, you had sent that survey out or something like that. And it said 20% no, 17% maybe. Wow, that's 37% of your population that just may not come no matter what you do. So I think that's a huge concern. My other concern is entry into the offices. One thing we've learned with citizens coming in our front door, nobody reads. They don't pay attention. They do look at the things on the wall and the lines on the floor. So again, I've seen some of those offices, those front offices, so crowded. So you're going to have to figure out how you're going to limit people. Are they going to stand outside in line while you're trying to get parents in? I don't know. Good luck with that. We put markers outside. That has helped with that. We encourage face masks. That has helped. But parents are a whole different, thing. Transportation said, I don't know anything about that. I've heard some community talk about staggered start times, or maybe K through 3rd comes on Monday and all Tuesday is shut down and you have more of a 4-day learning module. I've heard some districts are definitely looking at that, rotating rather than just staggered starts, you're staggering days, and how that's going to be looked. I think you're going to find you're going to have your nurse is going to be overwhelmed. There's no way one nurse in a school can tackle this. So you're going to have to figure out who's your go-to. Teachers are going to be overwhelmed with making Johnny and Mary separate. Somebody's going to have to be the COVID liaison. You're going to track people, how you're going to do that. I mean, I am here in the city and I tell you, I'm overwhelmed. There's so much tracking, especially if you're going to turn it into the federal government, you know, so I feel for you. Any tips I can give you, things we've learned that we've done well and done bad. We're now considering possibly, it's being discussed at least, maybe postponing our July opening for several reasons. One, we've learned some things. Two, employees don't necessarily want, you know, they're scared. You're hearing things, COVID numbers are going up, the ICU beds are full. And so you want to keep people feeling very, very safe. That's absolutely critical. And everything you can do in your power to do it calms their fear, even if there's no fear to be had. So enough about that. You have a very, very big job. And it's a struggle how you're going to do it. So automation is going to be critical. That's it.
Thank you very much.
Mrs. Oshtenai?
Okay. So my biggest concern, and I second the other members' comments, but my biggest one is focusing on the mental health of not only our students, but our teachers. This past quarter, did have to be a mom, and I had to teach online at the same time. And that was incredibly difficult for so many things. My kids are very young. They needed mommy with them when they were learning. But I'd be there with my own students. So I think recognizing our teachers and our employees, if we do ask them to teach online, and the fact that they will have other things in their homes going on when you're asking them to focus on their students. And then recognizing that our older students will more than likely have to be babysitters to the youngers. So I'm very concerned about the mental health of our students when or if, I mean, hopefully we don't, but if we do have to teach online, that's a really big concern of mine. And then when they are in school, our students who are high risk, and making sure that they have all the support that they need is a big concern for me as well. Funding, of course, is a big issue. And then I don't know how you're going to do it. Yeah, those are my biggest concerns.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I think the only other thing I could add to that, do we know how many people in our district, how many families have internet access? If not, we maybe need to find out that more than there's internet at home availability. I guess the one question I have, if the family's big enough and they've got 4 kids or 3 kids or whatever's coming to school, if one of them stays home, does the parent say, do you all stay home? Or just part of them stay home, or you go because you're not sick and whatever else? I think, again, we need to get the parents, the family playing part of that. And I don't know if I heard you mention, but if there is somebody that's sick in one of the schools, does the state come down and shut the school down, or do you as the district, do we as the district have the capability of saying, oh, we're leading up to this metric like Perlette was talking about, and like we see that there's some problem here. Do we shut it down, or do we wait for another source to come in and shut it down for us? I think those are the only comments I've got. Anything else any of you have triggered up with any of the others that have spoken here tonight? If not, Dr. Freeman, we'll turn the time back to you.
Okay, thank you, President Nielsen and members. So one of the things that we've kind of worked through in planning is, this isn't in a slide, but it's an agreement on terms. So when we shut down for the 4th quarter, House Bill 2910 allowed us to do distance learning with kids. And, that was like at the, the final days of spring break. So we didn't reconvene the next Monday and put together a plan for learning activities for the remainder of the year. That legislation is expiring, and there's not new legislation for distance learning for the fall. So what that means is there's currently two models for funding schools. One is the 180-day calendar, where you keep track of the membership for 100 days, and that converts into a student count for your base level that you multiply out to get your budget. Most everybody on the board is familiar with that because we go through that exercise each spring. The other is called an AOI school, which is an all online school. And in that model, you keep a log of activity each day to justify your attendance. And then that becomes your student count. That base level is reduced 5%. So it's 95% of the base times that count that you produce for AOI or online. And so what we were finding is we were using a lot of these terms interchangeably. One of the things that people are discussing, and we're calling this now distance learning. Distance learning is when you're actually going to school at school, but you're taking part of the day or a day to learn at home. It's not measuring you online by a roster. It's not measuring you completely by when you're in your seat at school. It would be a hybrid model. Right now, that doesn't exist in state law. In state law, that would be a day you were absent from school, even if you were doing homework. It's one of the exceptions we're asking the legislature to make. Without that, people who are doing alternating models of half days or every other day would have absenteeism greater than 50% for the year, even though it was excused. If you can imagine missing 50 or 60% of the year because your schedule is that way, and then missing 10 days because you get sick, what that would do to the attendance rate of schools. So what we're doing now is we're really trying to talk about three things. And so one is 100-day membership in your seat. The other is 100-day membership online. And the way that would work in Littleton is the online program becomes its own school. So what we've applied to do is have an online school. It has a separate CDDS number. Parents would actually have to transfer schools. So if you're a parent who's online or who is scheduled to attend Astoria Vista next year and you want to go online, you would have to transfer to the Littleton online school, withdraw from one and enroll in the other. The other would be a hybrid model where you might go 2 days to Astoria Vista and do 2 days at home. And we're calling those distance learning days just to keep them separate from online, which is handled differently in state law. When we get to models, we'll talk more about what some of those options are and the pros and cons. But before we do that, we wanted to talk to you about the information we gathered in the surveys and town halls that we did. I want to remind members of the board that these are not scientific opinion measurement. There's no people support one candidate or another plus or minus 3%. This is just feedback that's representative of the group of volunteers who participated to give you some idea of what some of the sentiment out in the community is. The surveys aren't stratified or structured in any way that necessarily is a statistical representation of our community or of anybody else that we talk to. And so what we did find, for instance, when the community participated in the survey in the town hall, is that the grade levels were all pretty evenly distributed. We asked people what grades their kids were in, and so we got a good cross-section of grade levels in our data. All of the schools were represented in the data, but some had higher participation than others. No one was left out. Staff participation was the highest at about 150. The student sample was small. We invited more kids than actually made it. And that hasn't been unusual, in our pattern attendance with kids. but the kids that we had were really articulate, and we really appreciated and valued their feedback. So the next slide, we're going to start with the community and parent feedback. So one of the things that the district always scores well and came out in the survey, the end of the year survey, was that parents were really satisfied with communication between the district and the teachers in their home. What they said in our survey, and again, this isn't scientific, but 95% reported that they have internet services. So the gap on connectivity is only 5% of our kids. 84% said they have some devices at home. So the gap in having a device to learn on is 16%. So I think we're in pretty good shape there as far as our ability, if we were going to try to go to distance or online, is providing enough support to people to keep people connected. 91% agreed the district supported families. 80% felt they were able to assist with learning at home, and 77% said the materials were helpful. So if you flip that over, that means 20% struggled, and 23% didn't think that all the materials we provided were helpful. 74% thought students should wear masks when they're returning to school in the fall. Now, a lot of the rest of the feedback we have is comments that we collected in the town hall. And I know some of you peeked in on the town hall where we used a Padlet link for people to really free type responses to different kinds of questions. So we've gone through and pulled some of those out that we think are of interest and inform the board. So what we saw is comments range from being scared and nervous to confident about the data that shows kids are at low risk. Some parents were hesitant or unsure about letting their kids ride the bus and return to school so soon. Others said they were okay with riding the bus, and some said they would just drive their kids to avoid the bus problem. Some were willing to delay the start of schools, and others were ready to get back and wanted to start right away. Some of the parents wanted students in school because they needed to get back to work. Some had concerns. They expressed that the distance learning wasn't as good as being with teachers, and they wanted more than just packets, and suggested sometimes for live online teaching of lessons for their kids, which sounds really consistent with some of the feedback we got from the board in the second part. They also, in the next slide, they also indicated some willingness to adjust schedules, but they're anxious to know when we're going to decide if we're making a change. They had concerns about how recess and cafeteria were handled. I think everybody shares that. We're just going to have to figure that out and be really honest with the community about how that's going to be handled. Concerns were expressed about kids coming to school sick. You know, Kathy, you addressed this, not knowing who might be vulnerable. We do have some families who've already disclosed they have vulnerable kids, some autoimmune deficiency kids. So we are going to have a real challenge in addressing the needs of high-risk kids if they're coming to school instead of getting services online. And there were concerns expressed about handling kids with special needs and IEPs. Obviously, if we change the way we deliver teaching, there's going to be a lot of changes to IEPs and how we handle kids who have special needs. If we've been doing it a certain way for a long time and now we have to change, that will be complicated. In the next slide, you'll see a quote from a parent that said their feelings are really conflicted. And if you look over the body of this work, you'll see that not only are some people on one side of the fence and some people on the other, some people are conflicted about, you know, where they want to be, and they are having trouble with that. Some said we should open and just protect vulnerables, while others said if we can provide adequate distancing, they're concerned little kids will struggle to keep their hands to themselves and follow distancing expectations. I think we heard that from board members also. And this is a quote: they cannot be trapped in a face mask all day. In the next slide, we're going to shift to staff feedback. So all of the staff are concerned about clear expectations, accountability, absences, and the availability of substitutes if people get sick. 99% of the staff thought that the professional development offered during the fourth quarter was very helpful, and 91% said they would be willing to work through alternative schedules if we presented those. 90% would support a calendar change, but they're concerned about how it would impact pay schedules. As many of you know, teachers' balance of pay that they have in the summer often runs out right as school's starting. And if we delay the start of school, that means it's running out before school starts. So we would have to take that into consideration. 81% of the teachers indicate they're comfortable returning to work. 20% would want accommodations. We saw 6 people in the survey who said they absolutely would have a problem returning, but that gives you some idea if that's if this is the case. 80% are comfortable and 20% aren't. That's 1 out of every 5 teachers who may have a challenge coming back to work, and that would be a staffing problem for the school district. Some of the other feedback that we got was from the students, and they were just like everybody else. They were on both ends of the spectrum. They said that they didn't report a need for emotional support, but they were worried about other people and people falling behind. So I think you might hear that from a lot of people. I'm fine, but I'm worried about other people. They didn't think 6 feet was realistic for kids and that there would be some barriers needed. They thought wipes needed to be provided before and after lunch, and there should be limited numbers in the cafeteria. And one of them said distancing's not a problem if we all stay home, learn online. In the next slide, the kids said that students do want to go to school and they do want to be face-to-face, but maybe they could alternate days. They thought the Google Classroom was a really helpful as long as you have Wi-Fi. So they're concerned about some of their friends that don't have access. And one of the things we found is that there are some people who have access, but it's not necessarily really strong and really reliable, especially if everybody else in the neighborhood jumps on at the same time. So that could be a challenge, even though you have access, the quality of it. And students want tools they can connect with teachers for information and help. This probably comes back to the frustration people had with packets is if you get stuck or you don't understand, trying to figure your way through that. And the kids recognize that too. They want to be able to connect with teachers, whether they're, when they're not at school. And some supported the idea of distance learning from home, but all of them want teacher support. Students didn't agree on whether masks should be mandatory or optional and thought there would be issues with younger kids. So that aligns with the parent or the community feedback. And the strongest opinions supported wearing masks, but they thought kids would need to have breaks with time to breathe. They suggested maybe stepping outside or something. And those of us who've been wearing masks, know they take some time to adjust to, they can be challenging to keep on all the time. For those of us who wear glasses, a lot of times it steams up our glasses. And so having masks on a lot of the day definitely would be a challenge, even if it's an expectation. So moving right along, we were talking just in a broad sense about what some school models might look like. So we're starting on either end of this slide at the top or the bottom with kind of virtual only AOI classes. All activities and events are online. You are literally enrolled in an AOI school and you're doing online learning just like if you were on K-12 or Primavera or one of those other virtual school websites. The one all the way at the bottom is school back to the way it used to be, with everybody showing up on the same day on the same bus playing on the playground and going to lunch. So we don't think that's really an option anytime in the near future. If you're not going to do that, then what the health department's recommending is you try to get your groups smaller in what they call cohorts. So a class could be a cohort, or a half a class could be a cohort. And then what you do is you keep those groups of students staying together with social distancing guidelines during the day. If you have in-person classes, you need to have activities and events that have precautions for the health and safety of kids. So those models then, what we're calling is school-based programs and online-based programs, is blended programs in the middle. These are some ideas about how the blended programs could work. Early grade students are enrolled in their schools and are school-based. Upper grade students are enrolled online and are online-based. So essentially, the early grade students can spread out through the school. The required hours for grades 1 through 3 are 720 hours a year. So the school day could be shortened to 5 hours a day. The problem with that would really be there aren't extra teachers. So teachers would be seeing 2 sessions of kids, and you'd be asking teachers to work like a 10-hour school day if you were going to try to overlap early grades. This is being tried in some other countries that probably don't have some of the same staffing issues that we would have in the US, and especially in Arizona. Another is to have half the students attend school-based half of the days. So a couple of school districts have announced that they're going to do this. Cartwright Elementary and Alhambra Elementary have said they're going to have kids, half of them on Monday, Tuesday, half of them on Thursday, Friday, or half of them on Monday, Tuesday, half of them on Wednesday, Thursday, and not have kids on Friday. As we said before, one of the challenges for this is if you're calling that distance learning, but you're not able to take attendance, your absenteeism would be really high. And a lot of us are concerned that the legislature might be punitive about that when they come into session next year or in a special session. And that's why we think it's so important for us to get that flexibility approved by them before we were entering into that kind of model. And that's what we're working with the governor on right now. The other is parents choose between school-based or online-based programs by semester or year, just like they choose which school they want to go to now. So we would essentially open up school choice again for parents who want to elect to go to the online school, essentially making it partly the parent's choice is if they're not concerned so much about spreading issues, is that they're choosing to put their kids in a school-based program. And if they are concerned, they could choose to put their kids into the online-based program, and it's a separate school. So you'd no longer be an EV parent, you'd be an online parent. That's the reason why we've submitted the online application. The only way to be able to do that is to be an online approved school through the state board. So our application's been submitted, and they're actually interviewing our people for demonstration on July 7th. And that was the meeting that Dr. Kelly referenced when she said people who thought they were having vacation after the 4th of July aren't having vacation after the 4th of July, because they need to go do a demonstration in front of a lot of faculty to get a recommendation to the state board for Littleton to be able to have online learning next year. And that's moving pretty quick for the state board and the department. And we believe that at the very least we can get an 1-year provisional online approval to move forward with that. And finally, the other bullet is just other combinations. So you could do a combination of, say, allow parents to choose the online school if they know they don't want their kids to be in school this semester or this year. Allow the parents who are school-based to have a blended program where they're at school 2 or 3 days and 2 or 3 days at home, where you have some direct teaching and then some extended practice from home. So you have some online kids and some blended kids, but nobody who's 100% school based. These are all ideas that we've discussed and wanted to present to you to see what the feelings of the board were and how they thought those might be received by the community after hearing all of the town hall input. So that's part 4, a brief introduction to models. Any more work on the design of models kinds of depends on the direction we decide to take. The next slide is the last thing. Here's questions that we know need to be answered. So when will we know the plan? We're telling people right now that the board will take action, we think, on components of the plan on the 23rd. So we're holding off on making commitments unless we get some advice from the board tonight on how we might narrow down some of the options. When we'll return to school? Right now, we haven't changed the school calendar. So what we believe right now is the school calendar is the school calendar until it changes. Will the school calendar change? That would take action by the board. Will we still have 180 days? So if kids are on a 100-day ADM attendance calendar, you have to have a 180-day calendar. And you have to have a way to count kids to get your 100-day ADM. But all kids may not be in attendance at the school if there's distance learning approved by the legislature. So you have a 180-day calendar, but students may only attend 90 days in the building and 90 days in distance learning. We don't know the answer to that yet. Will school day times have changes? We think if teachers are going to have to split their classes and different groups will be meeting on different days, we might want to eliminate the early release day and put those minutes back into the other days, standardize the length of day. One of the concerns that staff had about how early the early schools were starting. So that could provide some relief there by making a standard school day and a standard work day time that would help with the rotation, the A-B rotation between in-seat learning and distance learning. What do we do about social distancing? And when there's places where you can't necessarily have 6 feet of separation, what are we going to do for breakfast and lunch? We already do breakfast in the classroom. So we thought about doing lunch in the classroom, but I think that is a different challenge if you're doing A-B rotations. So for instance, if you only have on Tuesday and Wednesday, instead of 28 kids in your room, 14, and you're feeding 14 people breakfast and lunch, this is different than trying to feed all 900 or 1,000 kids in your school breakfast and lunch in the classroom every day, in addition to the cleanup and sanitation and those kind of things. So if you're having more kids than that, you might have some kind of special schedule, extended schedule, cleaning in between cohorts, or that kind of thing. More questions in the next slide. What will cleaning look like? What the department's telling us is we need to clean kind of after use, after cohorts. So they'll be cleaning every night. Normally we clean the campuses every night, but that doesn't include spraying with sanitation. So that would have to be added. And we would do that on a activity by activity, night by night basis. Will students be able to ride the bus? Obviously, if half the kids are going to school because you're on an A-B plan and some of the kids are going online, that frees up a lot of seats on the bus. If we decide that parents have to choose between online and school-based programs, the availability of seats in the bus would depend on which parents chose which option. So if 1/3 of the parents chose the online option, that means 2/3 of the kids would be in the school. And instead of 3 kids in every seat, there'd be 2 kids in every seat. You probably could do that. We just need to be really honest with parents in the community that it's not 1 kid in a seat, it's 2 kids in a seat. And I think if you get back to 3 kids in a seat, that's going to be a problem. We don't have more drivers and more buses. And we're concerned if we lower the capacity of the bus, our student route mile calculations would be compromised in future budget years, and we would need some relief from the legislature to address that. How will sick people be sent home? Of course they will. For how long, we don't know. It depends on what they're sick with. And right now, the place that they wait is in the nurse's office. If we want to set up a separate isolation area, and as Ms. Reyes suggested, the nurse, one nurse is probably not going to handle it. We probably will need some additional help in the health offices with nothing else, just with communication. Expectations for using PPE, we need some direction from the board on if all staff is going to be required to wear masks at school, if all students are going to be required to wear masks. Daily health screenings, you have really the option between trying to screen everybody and otherwise screening people who appear to be symptomatic. The county health department have told us that temperature taking really doesn't help with COVID spread, that people can have an external temperature that's different than an internal temperature. But the real danger in spreading COVID especially is not from symptomatic people, it's from asymptomatic people. So if you just think about, if you see somebody coughing and stuff coming out of their nose, most people right now would give them a wide berth and be concerned that they might catch something. It's the people who aren't presenting anything that appears to be unusual or unhealthy who may be able to spread the virus that the health department's really concerned about. And when it comes to flu season, kids are great flu spreaders. So they don't have any reason to think kids wouldn't be great COVID spreaders too. With a big concern of the health department is flu season at its peak usually fills up hospitals. And if we have a flu season and a COVID season simultaneously, it could easily overwhelm the healthcare system. So we're going to want to recommend people get flu shots and have other good health maintenance practices, sleep and those kind of things. But probably health screenings, first of all, to try to screen every kid every day would be overwhelming to staff. But to have some protocols for when people need to be pulled aside and screened would be prudent for us to develop. That, in addition to the questions you asked, is our list of questions now. Have we generated more questions for you, or have we generated some ideas where the board can start giving us direction on what kind of work we should be doing between now and the 23rd to provide you with the information and recommendations you'll need for changes in practice or policy?
Thank you. Lots to think about. I don't know if there's any quick comments tonight. Is there a possibility that we can put those down on paper and send those to you?
Everybody on the team is listening for direction.
What?
Dr. Freeman, this is Kathy. Is it possible to reach out to, I mean, we shouldn't be in a think tank by ourselves, right? I mean, every school district, every surrounding area. So as the superintendents meet, do you find that there is plans more made than ours, the same think tank? Are you able to sit down and talk to other districts and go, and just kind of come brainstorm what might make sense? To me, would be logical.
Yeah, Ms. Reyes, President Nielsen. So the superintendents have been meeting, and in our region, we've been meeting. So the Towson region superintendents are really concerned about trying to stay as close to the same page as we can. All of us have we've been meeting for the last few Monday mornings, and we're meeting again Monday morning, and all of us have feedback planned from our boards this week. So we've been meeting really with our own opinions and concerns, and then comparing to what other districts are doing. Mesa Unified ran a really huge committee. I think they had like 170 people and 11 criteria. Of course, the State Department of Ed had a task force and released their roadmap. So there's a lot of collaboration and a lot of people working together. Most of our frustration is in like we get guidance on what to do, but guidance isn't the same as authority. So do we have the authority to let kids stay home and learn at home and still count them? You know, we don't know that we have that. The thinking of the cabinet and the Tolleson region superintendents right now is it's going to be almost impossible for districts to do distancing without that flexibility. And like I said, Cartwright and Alhambra have already said that's what they're going to do. So, in that approach, you're eventually going to paint the governor and the legislature into a corner that they need to make that legal or they need to penalize everybody. But that's still in the process. I know in the city of Tolleson, in that Tolleson region, the contagion spread along the meat packing plant is a particular concern. And just because the packing plant is in Tolleson doesn't mean the people who work there aren't in our whole region, don't live in our whole region. So we don't know how many of our families actually are employed there, but it's a significant number. And if they're out and about in their community, in their homes, or they have, nieces and nephews and cousins, that could impact the rate of spread just in our region, just from that one thing. So the sentiment of the superintendents is to be really conservative and have health and safety as a primary concern. We just need some concessions from the state to make that work so budgets aren't devastated by trying to do that. And there are a lot of budgetary consequences for the decisions that people are making, and the legislature's been slow to react because they're concerned about what the revenue forecast is. And we are all up against the wall for starting school and having to make some assumptions and probably just some priorities based on philosophy. We're frustrated that we don't have more clarity. What some people have said is really, when you think about government agencies, they're working as fast as they can, that we're getting things trickling out a month or two at a time. So just like you were saying, we have some huge challenges in implementing this. I think people at the county health department, the governor, the legislature, they have some huge challenges in trying to figure out how much they can accommodate the school system with the revenue they have. We're always concerned that they may not be very accommodating, that their track record's not great. I don't know what else to tell you except that, yeah, there is a lot of comparison going on, and there's some pros and cons and risks to all of them. But what we've committed to in our region is getting back together Monday morning and sharing with each other the feedback we got from our boards to see if we can keep our region in close alignment with, kids being home from school and kids not being home from school. If we were going to go to some kind of alternating days to do the work to line up families so families can stay together when they're home or when they're away, and those kind of things. And so, like, we would need really start working on family alternating day attendance rosters pretty quickly, if that's what we were going to be able to do, so people would know which day they're reporting to school. That will take quite a bit of work. And part of the reason is because just because people are in the same family doesn't mean everybody has the same name. We can sort by address, but just because they have the same address doesn't mean they're in the same family. So
Let me just ask one more question, then I'll let someone else ask. So if a child, first of all, let's just say, not even a child, a parent, you find out, or a child is COVID positive, okay? And that's gonna happen. The doctor will notify I think it's the health organization, right? A letter is generated to the health organization back to the parent or the thing. I don't know how you'll know that. We ask that they report to us. I don't know what your method will be. And at that point, have you even thought through, will you dictate that child can't come to school for 10 days based on CDC? And are you going to require a retest? And if it's in the home, are you going to require the child to stay home if it's mom or dad or brother or sister?
So those are, I mean, those are good questions, Ms. Reyes, and those are exactly the things that school district administrators don't want to have to decide. So we have doctorates, but they're not in fixing people medically. And
Understand.
So what we understand from the county health department, and so we did make some progress. I mean, we didn't have that till last week, like questions like that. So if a child has confirmed COVID, they're home for 10 days. If they have COVID without symptoms, they're home for 10 days. If they're exposed to somebody in their family, they're home for 14 days because there's a 4-day incubation. So you add 4 plus 10. The incubation period is actually, you know, where that virus can become active and spreadable before you even have symptoms. And that's in a symptomatic person, they can spread before the symptoms, you know, before the symptoms become noticeable. They had one person on the news said, you know, I didn't feel bad until I realized they were putting on hand sanitizer and it didn't smell. And they're like, uh-oh, went and got tested and they had COVID, but they weren't, you know, dying to breathe. They just have this variety of symptoms. And so that person spreading that virus, it could impact somebody else completely differently. So if you have a fever, you're home at least 72 hours. And then they don't have a retesting regimen. It's one of the things that we would like to see as a testing regimen, both for staff and students. And there's not right now a county or a state plan to do that. But both of those conditions are 10 days out of school. And so if we don't have like a distance learning component in place approved by the legislature, they can't come in and sit down, they're going to miss 10 days of school. And so that's, I mean, these are all very realistic, probable issues for delivering learning support to kids that aren't really contemplated in statute right now. But we do know that. We do know the 10-day and the 14-day rule. And we do deal with communicable diseases all the time in the school district. And the county has business rules for all of them. So if we need any kind of more stringent EPA approved cleaner, we actually do whatever the county tells us is necessary for health and safety. So what you would have happen is the doctor would report a communicable disease to the county, who would call us, and then they give us guidance on how to respond and how to notify the community and what the notification needs to include. So that's never discretionary for us. And so depending on how communicable.
Is that true even for one child with COVID?
What?
Is that true even for a child that tested positive? You'll know that?
Well, so yes, because the other thing is they can disclose to us, then we call the county, and then the county gives us direction. There can be a delay of a day or two, and if they use the slow test, that could be 3 days instead of instant. So there are variables that kind of leave the rest of the population at risk, and COVID is new, and that's why we're pushing the county health department to what they said they will have a clearly outlined protocols for us. Is we want, if it's rubella or whooping cough or any other thing, there's a playbook in place where once it's reported to the county tells us what to do. we want to have that same playbook in place for COVID. So we're not making this up as we go when school starts. We want to have clear direction from health officials on what the school should do. We're not doctors or health officials. We're reading teachers. So, and they've given us more direction last week, and they said more direction is coming. But we don't, I mean, for the comfort of all, I hope, we don't use our discretion in that. We follow county health guidelines.
Thank you. Have any of the rest of you got any comments that you'd like to make?
Dr. Freeman, this is Amy. I'm sure you guys have already discussed this, but have there been any plans about with an alternating schedule and kids on IEPs and compensatory minutes?
Well, that's a great question, Ms. Sousnick. And even though people were critical of the use of paper packets and support, one of the issues is meeting the needs of kids with special needs and discriminating against them in the delivery of service. So there's a big question about if service delivery for kids with special needs is going to continue. As you know, most of those IEPs are written during the course of the year and they're good for a year. So if you did your IEP in March, it's essentially supposed to be good till next March. But then you completely can change the configuration of the school. You have essentially a change in placement. What's probably going to happen is people are going to need to have meetings. We're going to have special needs meetings going on like crazy. There's a lot of papers and recommendations coming out now. There has not been a lot of flexibility given by the Department of Ed or the U.S. Department of Ed on how districts are supposed to do that. We imagine that there's going to be some litigation and definitely complaints filed with the Department of Education. It is probably, you know, the most complicated problem we'll have. And you can see where a lot of this discussion that we're having tonight is designed around general ed issues, which is still 87% of the students. I think one of the things we need to do, because for the Office of Civil Rights, is we have to be sure to treat kids with special needs with the same regard as kids who are general ed kids, and not give them, for instance, a less appropriate education. And what we're trying to do is we think we need to figure out what is appropriate, free and appropriate public education under COVID before we start to modify it. And I mean, you bring up a good question, but I think right now in the situation we're in, we have a lot of unknowns. We're going to try to figure out how to start the year and then try to figure out how to modify it. I'm sure all of you can appreciate our emails are just inundated with people who want to sell us solutions to these problems. But we don't even know how stable our budgets are going to be. And so the other thing you'll see is us being kind of conservative in what we're going to commit to, with the idea, just like Ms. Reyes was saying in their phases, is that when we get going, we're probably going to find a whole lot of issues that need to be addressed, you know, where we thought we planned well, but we're up against some things that weren't anticipated. I mean, I think we can anticipate running into things we don't anticipate.
What is the goal? What is the potential start date of school?
Right now, we haven't changed it. So it depends on, it would depend on what the board wants to do. So the greatest flexibility in starting is to have parents have online as an option for those who really, really don't want to come back. If we don't provide it as an option, they'll go find an online school and we'll lose the enrollment. We think we really need to have a in-school brick and mortar option for parents, because there's some who really don't believe there's a great risk and they really want to see their kids in school because they need to work. They're looking at the the well-being of their whole family overall, and weighing that together. That's kind of what the state health department said, is there's multiple things to think about. The health and well-being of child other than just COVID or the flu or things like that. And we think there's a bunch of people in the middle. So if we had a combination of alternating days, distance learning for ground people, and some people could go completely online, it's the most flexibility and most options. And the thing about distance learning, and member Rader alluded to this, is you could change the number of days in or out of school depending on what the COVID spread looks like in your community. So let's just say that there's a lot of COVID, but then it dissipates, and there are therapeutics and there are vaccinations by January. Is that you could reduce the number of days kids were distance learning and increase the number of days kids were in school, because the need for social distancing went down, and you would have the flexibility to do that. Really, in the online school, you're kind of committing to that school for the year or at least a semester before you would transfer schools. So I think a combination of approaches gives the school district and the parents the most flexibility to meet, if you didn't hear anything else from the feedback of the town halls, you should have heard that they're all over the board in both ends of the spectrum, and some in the middle, which aren't quite as, vocal. That, I think that's really what we're facing. We just wish that we could get the governor and the legislature and other agencies up to speed in time. They realize schools are starting at the end of July, beginning of August. It's on their radar. The governor knows it's a problem, but you can imagine lining up the political support to get something like that done. I would think they're not going to call a special session until they have an idea what's going to happen. And
Are we looking at the end of July then?
For the special session?
No, for our school to start. I don't remember the day we
Yes, our school starts the last Wednesday in July.
Okay.
That's the current calendar.
So you need feedback from us by, today it's a lot of questions, but are you looking?
Well, if there's a leaning of the board, like you think if we're going to bring kids to school, they have to wear masks. We probably need to convert that to a policy, that requires masks of staff or requires masks of students, because it's currently not in dress code or any other policy. And we'll get arguments for people that who says we have to wear a mask, and all of a sudden there's a showdown in the driveway.
Right. No, I understand. So maybe we just start with that first, and then either eliminate it or keep it, right? So
all of those questions I put at the end are things that people could say that, questions at the end of the presentation were, do you want the whole school district to go online and not have any programs in the schools? Is anybody for that? Okay, we cross that off. Okay. You want everybody to be in the schools with no blended or online options?
Well, hold on, Roger. Can you just go back to the first one for a second? I think, just to say something, I think we need to be prepared to possibly be 100% online. I don't think that's the desire, but that's going to depend upon what happens in the world and whether it's safe to be back.
So for purpose of discussion, Dr. Ramos, we're trying to make a distinction between being online, distance, and in school, because online's a separate school, funded a separate way. So if to say you're going to go online means withdrawing everybody from their school they're in and enrolling them in an online school. So the flexibility part comes where you have distance learning for people who are enrolled in school, not for kids who are enrolled in an online school. And so understanding the model, that's that blended program model. The blended program is where you could, if you had that capacity, is shift from being in the building to out of the building without changing your school enrollment. Does that make more sense?
Yes, I used the wrong term. Distance learning. The effect, you understand the effect.
Yes, I do completely.
Yes. So thank you for correcting me on the use of the term distance learning. I have a question, and you may not know the answer. When would be the time frame that a decision would have to be made, like the latest time frame?
Dr. Ramos, everything we're doing is a scramble. So if you think about, I was trying to explain this to one of the state senators the other day. Typically, to get ready for the year, we're talking about things we want to continue and don't want to continue in January and February. We're listening to the legislature. We're looking at dropped bills. We're conferring professionally, and then we thought in March, like we were narrowing down the budget, deciding how many teachers we were going to need, and we approved contract language and issued renewals to people. And that was for a regular year for starting in July. Then in April and May, if we need to do procurement and bidding, recruiting, all of those things that have to happen in April, May, and June, all of that work is happening. Really, if you just think March, offering contracts, April, May, June, July, the teachers are here. Like we start holding conferences in the middle of July. I think the 11th or 12th or 13th, we're holding professional development meetings. So the lead time typically is 3, 4, 5 months. And so we're right now having a discussion about what you would like your schools to look like. That should have been a January or February conversation to do everything. So this is a full-on scramble. And all the districts are trying to, do the right thing best they can, limited guidance from the legislature. So I don't know what we really think, and we got some of this input from parents, what difference is a week or two going to make? I mean, if we said we were going to start in October in Arizona, that would make a difference. If we said we're going to start in January, that would make a difference. But right now, we're really in a full-on scramble to put together a whole different kind of school year than anybody's ever done before. And every little bit that we could, to take a bite out of the apple tonight helps move us along and narrowing what the other implications are. But I mean, the best model for doing business, we've already passed that. And so, I mean, I just imagine there's going to be some things that we're going to struggle with that we're not going to get right. And we're going to have to, what do they say in the Marines? Adapt and improvise. It's, just being honest, it's not a situation that I would wish to be in.
Any other thoughts right there? Is there a possibility, Dr. Freeman, that the 2 slides that you had with those questions could be sent out to each member of the board?
Yeah, we can collect offline feedback. And so, as I was explaining, if we say we're going to allow an A-B schedule where half the kids are in school, a couple days and half the other day, that changes all the logistics. And so it makes the logistics simpler as long as we can retain the funding. And so that becomes a question for the legislature. I think that's the direction most districts are going, because they're really, to keep social distancing and safety with a virus that's this communicable, if you can't spread people out, it's going to be really hard to assure that the learning environment is, I mean, you can just imagine if the virus enters the learning environment, kids are in clusters, whole clusters of the kids are infected. You may want to have school open, but if everybody's sick, including the teachers, you'll end up closing just like we did under the teacher walkout. You can't, there's not enough people to provide learning. So I think the alternating schedule is what most people are going to go with, even though we don't have approval for it. And once we decide that, then you know, doing lunch and breakfast becomes easier because we don't have to go to the cafeteria. Once we do that, you know, cleaning up and designing the instructional day becomes easier because we know we're going to do a direct instruction of new information and practice on different days. Keeping track of the kids' one-to-one devices and their learning and connecting with the parents will be easier because it'll be intermittent, not long periods of time where you don't connect. So, you know, I think PPE is a big question. And if you split the kids in half, bus riding becomes way less of a concern. We can essentially keep the routes we have if we can split families together into two groups, so we can keep them together and then even work with the high school system to do the same thing. I mean, really at this point, if there's something that is appealing to members, you know, it would be good to have a discussion about. If there's something that really seems like it's out of bounds to members, like no matter what we do, I don't want our school district to do this, to kind of stake that flag, so we can start to narrow in on how to plan and then how to resource what kind of protocols we need. That would be helpful. I'm sorry to put this kind of pressure on you guys with the amount of time and information we have, but you know, I don't know that if we move the start of school back 2 weeks or even a month, how much more guidance or help you would have. I mean, I think no matter when we choose, we're under a lot of pressure. And if we choose the calendar, if we choose to move the calendar, we should probably try to do that with the Tolleson system, so families don't have kids in school and out of school at different times like we've done in the past.
Mr. President, just to that point, I actually think we need to proceed with school in July, because I think our infection rates from flus and colds are actually going to be much worse in the fall. And if we were going to consider taking an extended break, I would actually look at, you know, after Thanksgiving to Christmas, just closing down completely to avoid some of those high infection rates, or switching at that point. So I think historically summertime, and I know COVID's a completely different beast, when the weather's warm, infection rates are typically lower for the other viruses that are out there. So I would recommend actually that we get started so we have more flexibility throughout the year if we need to take extended breaks. Just a couple other points, and I think we could really talk about this all night long. So I do like the idea of maybe responding to all of these questions to give you a little bit more guidance. But again, I just think the flexibility is the most important component, because if you think about it, at any time you could have 20% of your teachers out, which would render all of your in classroom, all of your online stuff ineffective. So the more flexibility that we can build into it, and in my mind, I keep thinking about having one third grade teacher broadcasting, let's just say third grade as an example, broadcasting lessons to the entire district, so that you only have, let's say, one teacher per grade or per doing all of your instruction. So you only ever have to worry about one teacher being sick, and that all of your students that are in the classroom are engaging through their mobile devices or watching those wonderful screens that we have in each of the classrooms. And I know it's a paradigm shift, but I know my daughter in particular has no issue watching a screen all day. And so that if a teacher is out and is unable to be in the classroom, it's not as consequential. And if a student needs to be at home, they can still tune in and watch that exact same instruction that the in-school students are seeing, because I do think we're going to enter a paradigm in which there's no way to enforce attendance by students, by teachers, by staff. So just understanding that any given day you could have 20 to 50% of your students or staff not coming regardless of what model you choose, I think is very important. And then as far as the PPE, since you brought it up, I just don't think it's enforceable. There's going to be students that just are going to refuse, or parents that are just going to refuse. And then again, making sure it's used properly throughout an entire school day where it would actually be effective, I think would also just be a logistical challenge. Students are going to be taking it on and off to eat, to get drinks of water. It's just going to be a mess. So again, I know we could talk about this all night, but those are just kind of my closing thoughts on some of the topics we've been discussing.
I would like, President Nielsen, just to address some of that, some of the things that Member Rader brought up are being put together in a letter, actually a 4-point letter, going from all the Ed Alphabet organizations to the governor, and addressing some of those exact issues. Is that the way Arizona's run schools has been attendance based, and the idea of attendance and attending school is completely in a paradigm shift. And so things like that need to be thought of more broadly. So there's advocacy along those lines going on, but we're a subdivision of the state and subject to their rules. So trying to fit all those things together is a challenge for us. But people are working on that idea, is that the way we've counted things is maybe a little antiquated for the era that we're in and moving into. Moving the state along is going to be a challenge.
So what is it that we can do to give you some help and advice? Can we write anything down, send it to you? I was going to say, if we can get those questions, maybe in the next 3 or 4 days, we can get something to you by Friday or something at the end of the week. And
well, I kind of, I really truly was not being glib when I asked board members, is there opposition to us having an online school? I mean, we're moving forward as if it's a need in the community, and that parents could elect to be part of that. But if that's something that the board's opposed to, we can stop working on that. And it is a school. It's got its own school number. So parents who want to have their kids be part of that actually need to change schools and enroll in the online school. Having said that, we need a process then to reopen parent choice between now and the start of school year for them to elect to leave one school and go into another. So it's one thing for us to say it. It's another for us to do the logistics getting it done. If the parents who leave their school for online school are disproportionately coming from other schools, we may need to rebalance staffing and other things at other schools. So there's implications not only for going to online, but for leaving the school you're enrolled in. And so if we know that that's an option or not an option for a board, it has a lot of implications for logistics for us. So
Dr. Freeman, if we
from
do
the comments I heard from the board, oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I
think if we were to do online and say we just pick, I don't know, Littleton, whatever, that becomes our online school, right? That becomes an online school. All of students that are in Littleton go somewhere else because we're turning that school into online. Do I understand that correctly?
Mr. President and Member Reyes, no, so right now we have 7 schools plus the alternative school program here. It becomes your next school. It's a brand new school. It doesn't have any kids and it doesn't have any building yet. So it is a new additional alternative for families in Littleton.
That's because that's the way the legislature's got it set up right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's two programs. High schools do fractional attendance, so they can have kids who are online and enrolled, and they can be in a JTED program. They actually can get a 1.25 ADM for some of their kids when they combine programs together. But elementaries don't. So to deliver that, we need to be approved as an AOI. And then the difference is you count kids based on their online roster each day, and you turn that count in for your funding. And so if you establish that school, it counts its kids differently than the other 7 schools. They're counted on seat time, and the online kids are counted on online time. And what that means is not the number of kids in the district doesn't go down, where they go to school changes.
This is Amy. I personally think having an online school and giving that option to parents, especially during this time, is a really great option. I think that we do have some community members and some parents that are absolutely sure they do not want to send their students to school. So if we can give them the option of an online school, then we keep them in our district and in our attendance, and they're not going to any of the other virtual schools that are out there.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Amy. Any others have any other thoughts we want to give some direction to Dr. Freeman and the staff to?
One of the things that I heard from members was about flexibility, kids being able to stay home and learn or go to school and learn. And so we could come back with a plan for sharing time in school, sharing time away, shared delivery of instruction. One of the things that we heard from the community and heard from the board is we need a way to assess the kids' progress, which means really more connection between the teacher and the student. That didn't really happen in the 4th quarter at the end of this year. And that really needs to happen to help move kids forward and keep track of their progress. So while we may be able to have one teacher deliver direct instruction, we still need people to follow up with the progress of the kids, communicate with them and their parents, remediate or enrich as the kids need to be. So we think we still need to have a reasonable student to teacher ratio. We've been encouraging teachers to share the duties of lesson planning and presenting for a long time, and usually they're pretty they're pretty protective of their independence, and so making them more interdependent probably will be one of the byproducts of making some of these shifts. Is there opposition to having AB flexible planning? Or, you know, knowing the risks right now that the legislature doesn't have a system for counting those kids, but a lot of districts are moving that direction. Is the board opposed to us doing that, or is that something we should continue to look into?
Is that something, again, that we would do as ourselves, or would we do it in connection with Tolleson District and the other elementary schools that you've been dealing with? Any other thoughts on his question about AB and flexibility?
If it's okay, Mr. Chair, I think at this point, I mean, I don't know about everyone else, but it's getting late and I'm starting to overdrown myself in information. If we could, I'm committed to sending him something even by tomorrow. if I could just have a little bit of time to think about it all and digest it and send me the questions, and then I can respond back tomorrow. And then I think that at this point, you know, we're just, to me, I feel like I'm going in a circle. I'm not giving productive feedback.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think we're all the same way. And that was my thought about getting the questions out. That would at least give us something to look at. And then if we could get our comments back maybe by Friday afternoon, that way, whatever we've got, he could take to his meeting on Monday morning with the other superintendents.
Thursday would be better if you could do it. Thursday EOB?
Thursday afternoon. That would give us Wednesday and Thursday to do that if you can get those questions out.
We'll put questions together and get them emailed to you tomorrow.
That would be perfect.
And then that would give us till Thursday afternoon to get comments back to him.
Right.
And then we could put those together and then he could meet and we can get that.
I like that.
You, the rest of you?
I'm in agreement. This is Amy.
Thank you.
I'll also try to maybe make a remark about like what we heard the board say. So for instance, a rule on PPE might be hard to enforce and create a whole lot of enforcement compliance time and things like that. And if anybody wants to make a, you know, like an opposing statement or just say they agree with that, you know, that would help us. The more we can begin to narrow things, the more we can end up plan.
So what's your question to us? This particular question?
Well, so the question is should masks be required of staff and students? And I didn't hear a strong opinion from anybody on the board except John, who said that's going to be really hard to enforce with kids. Does that still mean you think staff should wear them or not wear them? But the opinion been presented so far by one member is enforcing masks on kids is going to be a problem.
Okay, so this is Kathy, and this is my opinion. I think forcing masks on students, I like the idea, but it's probably impossible. But I think in staff, I think it's highly possible. When they are in close quarters, when they are someone in their office, when you're in a meeting and you're not able to social distance, I think a mask is appropriate. I understand teaching, you may not be able to do it. But again, if you're in close quarters and you're not able to do the 6-foot distancing, wearing a mask doesn't hurt. And it's actually the CDC has saying the more you hear about it, masks are key and critical into potentially helping the spread. So I'm all for staff, not students.
And reasonable criteria, like you just said. If
Right.
you're in a situation where if you're by yourself, not that big a deal.
Right. If you're in your office, you don't need to wear it. But if you're going out and there's 5 people at the copier and you're waiting there, why would it hurt?
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's perfect. That's the kind of feedback that we need. And then we can make that into a sentence, make it into a bullet, bring it back to you to go thumbs up or thumbs down. That's what we're looking for. Thank you. Good examples. Oh.
This is Amy, and I'm in agreement with Kathy about the staff. I would, and I'm sure we wouldn't do this, but if a student wanted to wear a mask, I wouldn't want them to be in violation of dress code. So if we have to make that an option,
right,
dress code, I would be approve that.
We're going to run into circumstances, you guys, where there's a vulnerable student, and as a precaution for the vulnerable students, people in the room should have masks.
Yep.
But only in that situation, for instance. Otherwise, it's optional. Okay. You see how this on and on and on.
Yeah, we have that here in the city, and I will tell you the majority of the staff appreciate it and feel comfortable with it because of they're not having to worry about someone's infecting that. I mean, it also lends itself to a certain comfort level, and people seem to be very okay with it.
Okay, well, I think I have some idea where members are. We have a process for getting out questions and getting your feedback, and then that'll help us next week pull some things together. We'll be putting out preparation for a board meeting the Friday before the 23rd, and there may be some things coming down to the last minute. So all the feedback that you have for us right now is helpful.
All right, with that, like I say, we'll get those questions out, and then you've got the opportunity to get back with Dr. Freeman in the next place. You want them sent to you, emailed to you? comments?
Mr. President, members of the board, I will email to all the board members. All they have to do is reply. Okay? Work for everybody? Thumbs up. All right.
All right. All right. If any of the rest of you got any comments, if not, the next item would be for an adjournment on this to go home and think a little bit about what it is and get back with it.
I'll move the board adjourn at 8:19.
This is
Carlotta
and I
seconds.
second.
Thank you very much. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Thank you so very much for all your time and effort tonight. We really appreciate it. We appreciate what the staff is doing and all the work that they're doing to try to get this taken care of in such a short time. And thank you all for being here tonight. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Curtis.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.